I want to welcome you all to another reasoning. We call this the Semaj Mind Spa, where we stimulate, transform, educate, entertain, whatever. The idea is sharing information that will take us to another level. And spa, why we call this the mind spa, because spa does a number of things. But one is removing toxin, and the other is to energize and make one better than you were before. The theme today is the psychology of dining. I've been thinking about this for a while, and we don't normally look at this concept from a psychological perspective, but I do believe that it is necessary. And I want to share this with you, and you'll see where I'm going with this, and hopefully it will make some sense. Now, when you raise the question about the psychology of dining, and you go to Google and you look at the psychology of dining, you hardly see anything. But what you'll see a lot of stuff on the psychology of food and eating, because there's a lot of information how food affects the way we feel, how your body image is connected with your mental health, how we can use food as a negative coping mechanism, which can lead to all kind of problems, such as eating disorders and all the problems many people have with weight management as a result of food. We see a lot of information as, again, food as your natural medicine, and how craving for different foods can be linked to various neurological desires. Even the way the brain can vary in terms of the balance and the variety of food that one consumes. But there's a lot of information on the impact of food marketing to get to how to sell you and get you to consume different foods. But the psychology of dining, not much information on that. That's why I believe that it was necessary for us to let's talk about this for a while and see where you see. Now, if we go back prior to birth, a sucking reflex is built into the human being. It is not activated till about the 32nd week of pregnancy. And then by about the 36th week, it is fully developed. You can actually see this when you look at images from within the womb, that you actually see the reflex being developed. And before birth, the fetus is shown to be actually sucking. This reflex allows the infant to do something very important to survive. Ingest food from a nipple, of a bottle, or a breast. And guess this is life. So that early sucking reflex prepares one to consume nutrition, to physically survive. But it also provides bonding in terms of social and psychological comfort. So a lot of things are built into us from that early, prior to birth, right after birth, and all the way through life. How you consume nutrients. Clearly, there must be some strong psychological connotation to it. Now, across the world, table manners evolve. There are wide varieties in how people eat, what they eat, where they eat it, how it's consumed. I mean, you can see some strange variation in some parts of South America and in Africa too. You pour libations, you pour some on the ground before you start drinking or eating, so as to bless Mother Earth or to give the ancestors some. In some parts of Africa, it's considered unclean to eat with your left hand, because it says, look, the left hand is for something else. It's for exit. The right hand is for entrance. That's what you eat. you put the food in, and you go across the world. Cultures shape the way we consume food. What we consume, how we consume it, when we consume it, where we consume it. A lot of information, a lot of time is spent making sure that we understand how it works. Now, within each culture that one exists, there's an evolution. Let me share mine. Very early, parents teach you how to use knife and fork. You go from the nipple, then you go to cup and spoon, and then that cup and spoon, bowl and spoon for a while. But then you eventually start to learn how to use knife and fork in our culture. Very early for me, box food was something I never was interested in. So even when as a young child, when we went on picnics or anything like that, my mother had to make sure she carried utensils that I was familiar with, because eating out of a box never interested me. Today it doesn't. All right. Then various socialization things I noticed. I remember realizing that when I lived in Mona Heights, I ran adjacent to the campus. Then I realized in the 60s that university students actually dress for dinner. Dressed for dinner. Now, a lot of that has been wiped out over the last 20, 30 years, because students can actually go to university and never use a knife and a fork for the entire time, because many students there consume is box food. And I don't think there's any decent way to consume box food, just the way you have to crouch over it and so on. My daughter went to Tabor Academy in Massachusetts, high school scholarship. And interestingly, at Tabor Academy, you wear anything to class. But then dinner time is different. Girls had to wear a dress or a skirt. Boys had to wear a blazer or a jacket, because they're preparing you for life to come. Another experience I had in my situation was that, look, over the years, I've assisted Juicy with a leadership program they had in the summer for students. And from the very first day, we have a luncheon. The table is properly set. And we use that to teach students about table manners, setting, what happens, how you conduct yourself at the dining table. I remember a very interesting situation. Almost every year, there are a couple of students who this is the first time that they're actually sitting at a dining table, and the first time they're actually trying to use a knife and fork. There have been some who refuse to even try because they have never ever tried it before. And we have to be very firm with them that you must start somewhere. Another example I want to share in my own evolution of this process is when I finished my PhD and started applying for positions in different universities. It's a very interesting ritual. They'd invite you to give a lecture to the faculty, and then that evening you're taken to dinner at usually one of the best restaurants in the area, which I realized that was also part of the interview, to see how you conduct yourself at dinner and over dinner. Another thing I want to share with you, over the years, I've done a lot of work with managers, and whether on retreats or at dinners where I'm the guest speaker or what. And it's so interesting that so many times you're at a table and the manager on either side of you is clueless as to what utensils to use, oftentimes using mine from both sides, because many of them came from homes where they never really learned to use knife and fork, went to university, had no involvement with it there, and now they were managers in formal functions, not knowing what to do. This to the side, I have a little example there of clearly how the process is. Now, in all of this, my experience was very, very specific. You see, I grew up poor. My first 7 years of life was spent mainly in tenement yards. Usually we lived in one room from between, birth and seven. Between 7 and 14, I kind of evolved a little further. We lived in two rooms. But even when we had just one room, my mother ensured there was a little table in the corner of the room, which she said that's the dining table. And I remember her words to this day. She said, even if it's just one banana we have, we're going to set the table and we're going to dine. We're going to eat like we're decent people. Even if it's one banana, that stuck with me. That dining, sitting around a table, and having pleasant conversation became a ritual for me, part of my life in growing up. Now, where are we now? I have a concept which I call the DT degree. Your DT degree. Whether you have a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, whatever, I think the most important degree that you'll ever get is your DT degree. What is that? Your dining table degree. The things you got from the conversations you had around your dining table. Remember, I'm judging you by my own experience, because it's around the dining table that so many lessons were learned. So many life lessons were learned around the dining table. Now, what about people who have never sat around a dining table or rarely do so? Never experienced that ritual that families go through around a dining table. Do they have a DT degree or they have no DT degree? What happens at this dining table? I see the dining table as the family altar. Culture is transmitted there. What is culture? Culture gives you a design for living and processes for interpreting reality. And all those conversations that take place at the dining table. I've jokingly said to my children that by agreeing to be born into my family, they have signed a confidentiality agreement. So the conversations they hear at the dining table are privileged communication. At the dining table, the family altar, that's where values are shared and reinforced. At the family altar, that's where vision is shared. The vision for tomorrow. What do I want of you? What do I want of myself? What do I expect? So dining table, the family altar, the culture, the sharing of culture, the values. Yes, B, DT is a major setting for socialization. So can you imagine now the result of people not having a DT experience and what has replaced it? My observation is that to a large extent, many people no longer dine. This may sound a little harsh, but guess what? I think in many families, people eat just as how I feed my dogs. Over the years, I have plenty of dogs, sometimes up to 20, 30 dogs. And you have to disperse them for feeding so they don't fight. So each person gets their food and they go somewhere they're comfortable. Typically, you go to your room, you go outside, you go sit in front of the TV. And this is the experience for a lot of people. You get a call, come for your food, dinner ready. And you come and take your food and you go and sit somewhere that you are comfortable. That experience of the culture transformation and transition, the values sharing, the vision sharing for many people does not exist. Or it has just been wiped out completely. Now, at the beginning of COVID, I started experiencing a problem just by being the lockdown. You can't go out, you can't go anywhere. So over time, I created what I call a new life ritual. I call it Fine Dining Fridays. so that on every Friday, we would do something critical. I rewarded myself for surviving another week of pandemic. I call this a form of pandemic fatigue antidote, that you want to do something pleasurable. And for me, it was around the dining table. You pull the family together, and that's what we did. And we call it Fine Dining Friday, and I shared the information with the nation. What were the elements of Fine Dining Friday? One, you put on your good clothes. All of us have something called with good clothes, with going out clothes, with church clothes, whatever you call it. You put on your good clothes. Why? The clothes miss you. The clothes is wondering if we're dead. They haven't seen you in months and probably years. Two, you take out the good plates, the good cutlery. You have them locked away. Everybody have something, no matter where you live or how you live, you have something called good clothes and something called good plates. But typically, they're just locked up. Why? For who? Three, the meal could be anything. It doesn't matter what you're eating. But you're going to serve it on the good plates, using the good cutlery, sitting there in your good clothes. And then you treat yourself. The only thing I specified, you buy a bottle of wine. Doesn't matter how cheap or expensive, and you dine. So this was my antidote. This was what got me through the pandemic. We looked forward to it. Friday, the thought by the time I got to Wednesday, I said, what suit am I going to wear? What am I going to do? You really started looking, you got so excited about it, and that dining experience and the conversation that followed got you through the week, preparing you for the next week. Now, I wonder what other people did when nothing like this, but Fine Dining Friday was my key, was my sustenance. We did this for ourselves. What was the result of this, folks? My spirit was raised. I got joy and thoughtful ideas. The endorphins were triggered. Guess what? The trillions of cells of your body are constantly eavesdropping on your thoughts and emotion. So can you imagine the kind of thoughts that would go through as we dine? Gave you enough joy to last all the way to the next Fine Dining Friday. So yes, it worked. It worked for me. And as I shared it, a number of people would say that, listen, they're trying it and it's working for them too. That dining, the psychology of dining. Even when my partner and myself, we were separated because of travel, we still had Fine Dining Friday via Zoom. As you can see here, I have my computer on the dining table, and she has her computer on her dining table wherever she is, and we dine and we have conversation as if we were there. Now, go back to the very beginning. What has happened to our culture? When young people are not exposed from childhood, from adolescence into adulthood with this ritual coming out of the psychology of dining. Does that explain the coarseness of our society? Does that explain where we are now? Think about it. Over the last couple of months, I've started taking cooking and preparing meals very, very seriously. In my household, yes, I am the one, I shop for food, and then I curate or create menus, and then I cook. I've come up with this construct that the chef's real work is to prepare elements of the world, the external world, for you to take in and to make it part of you. Because you are what you eat. So basically, what the chef does is to these elements of the world around you, make it palatable, make it tasty, make it look good. So you take it in as part of you, right? I've taken on that role. And then I've created something now which I call Bistro Semaj. What is that? Tasty and nutritious dinners with international flavors for busy people with a discerning taste. We burn fire upon boring food. Food must be exciting and must be tasty. You must enjoy what you're eating, and it must be nutritious. But one caveat, from prep to table must be less than 1 hour. In our culture, too many times people are spending hours, hours, hours in the kitchen, and in 15 minutes, bam, people don't eat. No, for me, I will cook, but the whole thing from prep to serving should not take more than 1 hour. So the kinds of things I curate or create must fit to that. You must spend more time at the dining table than in the kitchen. The way it has turned out in my household now, when I say dinner is ready, and then within 5-10 minutes we gather at the table, do you believe that sometimes we're at the table for 2 hours, 3 hours? Because the pleasant conversation coming out of the meal. Now, I wonder, going back to how cultures emerge in terms of dining, in terms of eating, in terms of time spent, have we lost something? Some families, it never happens at all. Some maybe even once a week. Believe me, if you did it once a week, that would be a good thing. Question B. It says here, in absence means our young ones are self-propelling themselves through their childhood and adolescence. Exactly. And with the help of television and social media. I make it clear, that the television producer and director, the people who create all kind of things on social media, they did not apply for the job to raise my children. It is my job. And the dining table is the critical space where what? We transmit culture, we transmit values, and we transmit vision, which we share with each other, and the iron sharpeneth iron. So yes, folks, the psychology of dining, I think, is real. Evaluate your own situation. How did your dining experience evolve growing up as a child, going into adolescence, forming your own families? What was your experience? What was it like? What is it now like? What is the psychology of dining? What kind of person are you becoming or have you become as a result of the psychology of dining? If we are to transform Jamaica to be a better place, do we have to start to look at the dining table? Do we have to start to examine people's DT degree? Is that the source that we need to get back to? Let me hear from you. What do you think? Can we become a better people by examining the psychology of dining and the altar, the dining table becoming the altar of the family? Let me hear from you. I'd love to hear from you on this, the psychology of dining.